So with interpolation and vbind, we learned about two key features for outputting and for using Vue managed data in the HTML code. And that is really important. Now let's make our app at least a bit more dynamic. And for that, let's say we actually have two possible course goals which we want to output here. And for the moment, we'll randomly decide which one to output. Now for that, we need to run some code. We need to basically roll a dice, you could say, and then either use this text or another text as a course goal. And we can do this with another option we can set on this Vue app object. We already set the data option. Now it's time to learn about a new option, and that's the methods option. Methods allows you to define functions which should execute when something happens, when you call them, for example, or as you will learn later, when a user event like a button click occurs. To methods, you pass a JavaScript object. So that's an important difference to data. Data itself was a function, a method. Methods takes an object which will be full of methods, so of functions. But these functions are now totally up to you. You can name them however you want. For example, output goal. But this is totally up to you. This can be any name you want. Methods, on the other hand, just like data, is a reserved term, is a reserved name. But inside of this methods object, you can use whatever you want. The only important thing here is that all your properties you define in this methods object need to be functions, because they need to be callable as functions. And you can either do it like this or use the method shorthand in here, just as we did it with data. Now, in output goal, we could now calculate a random number with math random, which is a built-in function in JavaScript, totally unrelated to Vue. It's a core JavaScript function, and it will simply calculate a random number between 0 and 1. And here we could then simply add a if check and say if random number is smaller than 0.5, we want to return learn Vue as a goal, and else return master Vue. Whatever you want. Those strings are up to you. And now we got this function, this method, output goal, which will either return this or this text. Now we want to use this text here in this paragraph to, well, display a different text every time this page is reloaded. So for that we need to call this function somehow so that it executes. And the cool thing is we can call a method, so a function defined in this methods object, in our HTML code just as we can point at a data property. You can do both. So here, right now, we're pointing at a data property, but we can also instead, if we want to, execute a function that is defined in methods. That's just important. It needs to be defined in methods. So adding output goal here directly in that config object you pass to create app would not work, for example. But since output goal is defined in methods, we can call it here, and since we want to call it, we need to add parentheses here, just like in regular JavaScript. And that's the interesting part, by the way. In your Vue-controlled HTML code, in this interpolation syntax, but also when using this binding syntax, you can execute simple JavaScript code. For example, here we could also execute 1 + 1 if we wanted to. We could also execute math random here if we wanted to. What you can't do in here is write complex code. For example, you can't use if statements in here. This will not work. But you can use ternary expressions, and you can write any JavaScript expression between your double curly braces and when using vbind. And therefore, since we can use such basic JavaScript expressions, we can also call output goal here, like this. And if I save that and reload, I see learn Vue. If I reload, at some point I'll see master Vue. I'll see a different value from time to time because we always calculate a brand new value because this gets called. And I'm showing this to you because it is important to understand how Vue works, that you can execute JavaScript expressions here between the curly braces and when using vbind, and that this gives you a lot of flexibility, because just by using this very simple example, our application here is at least a bit more dynamic, because now we don't always see the same text here. Instead, after some reloads, it changes. And that is a more dynamic application which we can easily build with Vue and which we couldn't build with just HTML without JavaScript. So with that, we're already getting closer to seeing why Vue is really amazing, and we built our first, at least a bit more dynamic application.